Hello, and welcome to Friday afternoon. This is Mark Leslie with Free Friday Frights. I think I got the technology right this time, and I think I actually started the broadcast. Today is a non-fiction week. This is the fourth Free Friday Frights in a row, and I do them at different times of the day. It is 1 o'clock Eastern right now. And the topic today, if you don't already know, is the ghost of Jack Kerouac, who haunts Haslam's bookstore in St. Pete's, Florida. I'm going to give you a bit of a background. If you can tell, I am wearing my Tomes of Terror shirt for good reason. Barnaby's actually, he doesn't have one in his size, so he's wearing the Creepy Capital one. But, you know, and just so you guys know, that's not the real Barnaby. Well, it's not the latest Barnaby. That is Barnaby the second. Barnaby the first broke into pieces. Barnaby the second, that's only the top half of his torso because he snapped at the hip. He gets old, his hips break, stuff like that happens. So this is Barnaby the second, and Barnaby the third, the Barnaby that you may have seen if you watched me last week or the week before, is the one who drives around with me in my car. Barnaby here is just a prop in the house, but he's there and he's happy. He's very happy. He's always happy. But in any case, I digress. I'm going to be talking about something I wrote in a chapter of Tomes of Terror, Haunted Bookstores and Libraries. Now, I do paranormal nonfiction books about ghost stories, and my previous books, previous to writing Tomes of Terror, were about places I had lived and obviously loved, like growing up in Sudbury. I'd lived in Hamilton for a long, long time, still love that city. But one thing I love more than almost anything in the world, craft beer is right up there too, are bookstores and libraries. I love going into those places. I love going to bookstores. I love going to libraries. So the opportunity to write a book about haunted bookstores and libraries was something that combined multiple passions. And so this contains about 30% of the stories are Canadian locations, 30% of the stories are U.S. locations, and the other 30% are from bookstores around the world. It was a lot of fun to write, and it's a lot of fun to revisit. And speaking of revisiting, when I do a book like this, no, I don't travel all over the world. I can't afford it. Sometimes when I'm already traveling to a particular place for another reason, I may go to a locale, and I've had the pleasure of visiting some of the places, some of them before while I was doing research for the book, or some of them I had been to because, hey, they're bookstores and libraries. Those are places I go. But some of them I went to after. And Haslam's bookstore in St. Pete's, Florida, is one of the places I didn't get to until after I had written about it. I had been there for NINC, or Novelists Inc., which takes place in September, October every year, and it's one of the most amazing writer conferences that I've gone to regularly, and I'm looking forward to going there again this fall. It's on the beach in St. Pete's, Florida, and Haslam's is in the downtown area of St. Pete's. And it's the oldest and largest new and used bookstore in the state of Florida. The Haslam family had a huge history of being involved in the American Booksellers Association. One of the previous owners had been president, and they sat on the board, and they were very heavily involved in supporting the independent bookstore movement from the earliest days. Haslam's is a beautiful, gorgeous store. They have over 300,000 titles, and that's a mixture of new and used. And when I went to visit there, yes, I was there to visit because it was the place that Jack Kerouac's ghost allegedly haunts, but I had so much fun. It's such a large, it looks like a warehouse when you get there, and it's a wonderful place with all kinds of great selections and collections put there by the staff. Now, I need to take a sip of coffee here because the throat's just, it wasn't as fun as last week when I was drinking beer. But it'll do. Coffee's a good elixir. So Jack Kerouac moved to Florida, and he was living in Florida with his mother and his wife. I think it was his third or his fourth wife. And he used to frequent the store. He used to go in and he would talk about his philosophy, and he was one of the Beat Generation folks like Ginsberg, etc., who were well known. He would go there for events, and that was fine. But sometimes he'd go into the store and he'd get into fights with the manager at the time, or the owner at the time, And what he would do is something that plagues and frustrates booksellers to no end, and it's something that I got frustrated with. So when an author comes into the bookstore, and perfect, I can use the example because there happen to be books behind me. They would go and say, hey, look at this. I'm going to take my book and I'm going to spine it, or I'm just not going to be spine, I'm going to face it out in front of all these other books, which is a dick move. Or even worse, maybe you take a book from the bottom shelf here and you put it completely out of alphabetical order, and you do the same dick move. And authors do that, and it's frustrating because what's just going to happen is even anal shoppers like me, when I go into a store and I see a book out of place, I go and I put it in the right place. I can't help it. Book selling is in my blood. But it frustrates the staff. So back then, it was non-computerized inventory, and the staff really knew where the books were roughly in relation to where the alphabet or however it's being shelved. Some sections are shelved geographically, but in this particular case, his books were shelved under K, and sometimes K is right in the middle, sometimes it's eye level, sometimes it's on the floor. Jack would come in and do that with his books, and the manager and him would get into very heated arguments. So flash forward a few years to the year 1969, a very significant and important year. It was at the age of 47, very young, Jack Kerouac died. Now, I'm going to draw my own personal connection here because, hey, it's me and I can talk about me. I was born that year, and I'm older than Jack was when he died. So that's kind of a scary thing to look at, the influence that he's had on American literature, and the fact that he died at the age of 47, that he died the year that I was coming into the world. But that's not the point here. The point here is that he died at the age of 47, and even after his death, the books in the store would suddenly move on their own. People would find books on the shelf, his books on the shelf, the way Jack would have done it when he came in there. But that people knew he was not alive, so couldn't have been him. Was it his ghost? Some of the speculation is perhaps it was fans of his who wanted to keep his name or his books popular. But staff had also reported seeing Jack occasionally, fleeting glimpses of him in the corner of the store or walking through the store, etc. There were some investigations done at the bookstore, and a medium had come in, from nearby Orlando came in and actually said she conferred that there was a ghost that she believed was Jack Kerouac, but then there was also another even more sinister ghost in that building of an old man with a bulbous nose and whiskers, and he was very, very evil presence. And there were some other paranormal groups that had come in and done some measures and readings. And then, of course, there were other weird phenomena that happened. There were cold spots that people couldn't explain, books flying off the shelf. Even one of the managers reported that he was probably tidying books in a section, and then he heard a rumble. And when he looked over, all of the Kerouac books in the Kerouac section had tumbled to the floor, all at the same time. So some things that they just can't explain. And he is not a believer. He does not believe it's the ghost of Jack Kerouac, but he doesn't know what it is. Just a weird phenomenon. So when I was in St. Pete's a few years ago, I went into the store and I checked it out, and I took dozens of pictures, and I had a really, really good time with it. And then when I was at the cash, I was talking to the cashier, and I had mentioned, oh, I wrote about this bookstore in Tomes of Terror, etc. And she goes, oh yeah, I saw Jack last week. And I went, pardon me? She said, yeah, I saw him last week. Come on. There was no lineup, so she took me around, and she showed me the section where one of his biographies was, and she pulled the book off the shelf. And she said, so I was there at the cash desk, and I saw a man walk through this section from the back of the store towards the front of the store. And she said, looked familiar. And I walked around, and by the time she walked around the corner to see where he had moved, he just disappeared into that section and never appeared again. And she held up the picture and she said, and he looked exactly like Jack in this picture on the cover of the biography. And I said, well, that's kind of creepy. That's cool. Thank you. Thanks so much. Wish I'd had that when I'd written the chapter. But it was a really neat experience to get that story firsthand from a bookseller. If you go to markleslie.ca/Free Friday Frights, there is a link to a short video called 60 Spooky Seconds, where I basically talk for about 60 seconds about the ghost of Jack Kerouac. And there's a bunch of pictures that I've taken when I was there in person, as well as some pictures of Jack Kerouac, including this lovely bookseller holding up the book. Now, here's an interesting thing about the picture. I never noticed it. Only noticed it recently. Is there's a weird line in the image, and there's a digital photo, and I don't know where it came from. But it was kind of fun to go see the bookstore in person and to check out one of the locations that I wrote about. And, you know, on top of that, because it was a bookstore, I had an absolutely delightful time. And when I return to Novelists Inc. in Florida this fall, I'm definitely going to be going back to Haslam's bookstore for two reasons. It's a great bookstore, and it's always good to visit bookstores. And also because when I was there last time, just up the street, there was a brewery and that I had a wonderful lunch at and enjoyed a few brews before I got back in a cab and went back to the conference. So for anyone listening, if you're in the St. Pete's area or you're going to be heading to Novelists Inc., let me know. Maybe we can split a cab together and take off to Haslam's bookstore and enjoy a pint or two at the brewery. I'm sure there's even more breweries in that neighborhood now. So that's a little bit of the story about Jack Kerouac in Haslam's bookstore. This was a nonfiction week for Free Friday Frights. You can read about it at markleslie.ca/freefridayfrights. And just an explanation is when it's fiction that I own the rights to, I put up the original story. The 2 weeks ago when I did Friday the 13th, it was an original article I wrote. Now, because I couldn't, I'm sure the publisher would give me permission, but I did sign the rights to that chapter to my publisher, and they have allowed me to do excerpts and things like that. I thought it would be a little bit more interesting rather than just copying and pasting the chapter to actually write a unique thing. So last night around probably 10 or 11 p.m. Eastern, I sat down and said, well, I better write something. And then I basically, you know, reread the chapter, watched the 60 Spooky Seconds video, refreshed my memory of some of the things, and I wrote the article that you're going to see there, which will be posted there for the next 24 hours. I am, speaking of nonfiction, I have the next book is Macabre Montreal that Shana Krishnasamy and I have co-authored together, and we got it back just this week from our editor, thanks Dominic, with some of the developmental edits to it. And I just finished going through that, and I punted it over to Shana, and Shana's going to be going over that over the weekend, and we get that back to Dominic, and then he, you know, touches up and does additional edits on our rewrites, etc. And then that will go through the line edits and all of the other fun process where they add the images and the text we provided to go with the images. A lot of the photos Shana took because she lives in Montreal and got a chance, even though I hadn't been to most of the places, she went on all the ghost tours and she took a lot of photos. So that was great because when the author takes the photos, you don't have to worry about how you're going to pay for these. So that was neat. And Macabre Montreal comes out later this year. I did get Shana to agree to come on camera with me for a Free Friday Frights around the time that Macabre Montreal comes on. So it won't just be me blah, blah, blahing. There'll be a chance for Shana and I to do a little bit of back and forth, which I think will be intriguing. And of course, now that Macabre Montreal is kind of pretty much out the door and I'm just, you know, doing quick editorial passes at it, the work has begun on the Haunted Bars and Breweries book, Spirits Untapped, and Liz and I have been posting to the website, spiritsuntapped.com, and that website is more about the spirit of beer culture, but it does include some of the haunted locales, including Augusta's Winking Judge, where I have been for a few of these videos as a haunted bar. So there are constantly free reads that you can get there. Not all of them are scary. Most of them are hoppy and fun and creative and tasty and are about beer culture. But that will be the next big non-fiction paranormal ghostly kind of book. And Liz and I will be working on that book in the summer of 2018. and hoping to be able to turn that into the publisher if this is the schedule we go, because we haven't gotten a contract for it yet, but that's the plan anyways, so we can get it done over the summer, and then I can move on to the next project. And the next nonfiction project that I'm working on, and this is because I moved to Waterloo at the end of 2017, beginning of 2018, as I thought, wow, there's lots of fun ghost stories in the Cambridge, Waterloo, Kitchener area, the greater region of Waterloo, that I'm going to start collecting some of those stories so I can then put out a book about where I'm living now. Because, hey, why not write about the places that you know really, really well and you can actually get to? So much easier for me to run around with a camera and go talk to people in person than it is to do research about a place that is far away. Well, that's the initial chat for this free Friday Frights. This is Mark Leslie. We just chatted a little bit about the ghost of Jack Kerouac. That was from the chapter Kerouac's Favorite Haunt, which is Haslam's Bookstore in St. Pete, Florida. If you're ever in the area, do check it out. And speaking of checking out bookstores, tomorrow is Independent Bookstore Day. I'm going to be going and making sure that I visit and buy something from one of the amazing local bookstores here in the Waterloo region, and that's Wordsworth Books. Amazing folks there. This bookstore has an amazing heritage in terms of the royalty of the Canadian bookselling industry, and so it'll be great to go to Uptown Waterloo to pop into Wordsworth on it is April 28th, Independent Bookstore Day, and that's a great thing to do. So wherever you are, let's hope there's a wonderful library, a wonderful bookstore near you that you can go and check out and just absorb the beauty of the things that are books. Thanks for hanging out with me on this free Friday Friday. Hope you have an excellent Friday and a most wonderful and maybe even a sometimes a little bit spooky weekend.